Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here and thank you for the opportunity. My name, as Sarah said, is Vanessa Richards and I'm a reporting geek. And I deal with both kinds of reporting, both internal and external. I've worked a lot in the mining sector, and a lot of my work has been to determine how various corporate mechanisms and, most importantly, culture act to drive or hinder performance. So over the past week, we've heard about some of the great work that people are doing to redesign mining companies and minerals value chains. There are some powerful mechanisms emerging, innovative finance models and technical approaches, new data insights to enable informed choices on critical issues. We've just heard a great example from Libby about an innovative approach to breaking down barriers and creating value through collaboration. Now, keep that word in mind, because it's a word that I'm going to continually try to stop myself from repeating so that you don't all fall asleep from me just saying collaboration every second word. What we've heard about quite a lot is a degree of frustration and concern about the speed of change. The need is urgent and the solutions, at least some of them, are out there. So why aren't we doing it? And why, even with all the right policies and strategies in place, why are sustainable choices too often not made? So really what I would like to talk about today is some of the messy, annoying, frustrating and human aspects of critical choices. Firstly, I want to be clear that sustainable performance is absolutely about choices at the corporate level, in the boardroom and the senior leadership team. Without that direction setting and commitment from the top, you're nowhere. But secondly, I would also like to say that a lot of people listening to this might be tempted to think that these things might be interesting, but that culture, corporate processes and structures are not really your problem. If you're a geologist or you're a risk manager or something, you're just like, that's in the HR box, that's in the leadership box. But I hope by the end of it, you might think about how it is relevant to you in your role as a leader, as part of a governance function, or even just as a voice of influence within your organisation. So walking the talk on sustainability means making critical choices throughout the organisation. It's the procurement specialist who spots an opportunity to purchase decarbonised electricity. It's the facilities manager who installs food waste recycling. It's the engineer who develops an alternative conveyor belt system to save energy, reduce noise. It's the team leaders who encourage those initiatives, the finance people who approve funding, and the communications people who promote them. So for many of us, I'm sure this would be a very familiar picture. It's no different to any other aspect of corporate performance. Of course, we create more value and reduce risk when we're all pulling in the same direction. Safety is the sort of gold standard example. We're all very familiar with the fact that everybody has to think about safety in every aspect of their jobs. If we don't, then people die. But achieving sustainable performance in a world where we're facing the real possibility of ecosystem collapse and the euphemistic disorderly transition is hard. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but sustainability is complex, it's multifactorial, it's interconnected and fast moving. It can't be boiled down to a single, simply understood concept or measured with a handful of simple metrics. That poses a challenge in particular for mining companies. For very good reasons, we tend to have a command and control approach and a strongly hierarchical culture. What happens when you try and solve a complex multifactorial problem with a command and control approach? You're slow to respond, you solve one problem, you create another. You have a lot of meetings between well-intentioned specialists where nobody has authority over all the critical aspects. Nobody has budget, time, resource. Escalation points are unclear. The leaders to whom you'd escalate don't have time or understand the issue or think it's their problem. So the primary culture of mining companies is not going to change anytime soon and probably shouldn't, because it does have some powerful advantages. But you can mitigate against the worst aspects of it by empowering people across the organisation to make sustainable choices within their sphere of influence, and by fostering connections between those spheres of influence. And I'd like to talk to you about some of the practical mechanisms for that. So, empowering choices. First thing to consider is literally, do the right people in the right places have the right power? Does the organisation understand what risks sit where and how they need to be monitored? Do the people who can see the risks have the authority and resource to deal with them, or a workable mechanism to escalate them? Your risk accountabilities, reporting lines and KPIs need to be really on point. You also have to keep a weather eye out for silos. I'll talk more about that later. Secondly, do these people have, or can they call on, the insights that they need? The cliche that data is the lifeblood of an organisation absolutely holds true here. Given the levels of complexity and change, there's a real risk of data overload. The information ecosystem is evolving very rapidly to help to mitigate that, but it's not there yet. So continuous learning is important in this context. There's an increasing range of micro-credentials and cross-functional training available. I get sent emails all the time, things like climate change for lawyers, supply chain risk for engineers. Pretty much it's a bit like Cars for Humanity, this thing for those people. That's all sorts of ideas coming up, which is great. Organisations need to encourage, support and reward their people for pursuing these. You don't have to be an expert in everything, but you need to know enough to know when you need to know more or who to reach out to. Which brings me to skill sets. There's a lot of noise, and a lot of it from recruiters, about a skill shortage in green jobs, whatever that might be. Yes, to some extent, technical skills such as interpreting climate data are missing, but I would argue that the more critical skills that are often missing are the ability to delve into areas of expertise and understand the core issues and translate that into the bigger picture and come up with a solution. The mechanistic mindset that comes with a command and control culture tends to recruit and reward technical skills. Also encourages a somebody else's problem approach, or conversely, a saviour approach, neither of which are optimal. Which then brings me to the issue of collaboration. So, command and control cultures do not tend to encourage collaboration. And it is challenging. I recently did some work with a client on what would be involved in piloting natural capital accounting. And it was clear that it would touch almost every specialist and leader in the company. You need to be prepared to work across disciplines to integrate diverse perspectives and knowledge bases. Differences in terminologies, methodologies, professional cultures, and even in the actual brains of people who are drawn to specific types of work can pose real barriers. I've built my career pretty much on being able to talk to deep specialists in tax and accounting and even geology, and it's hard work. All of this can lead to communication barriers and misunderstandings. Things like the micro-credentials I've just mentioned are one way to bridge the gap, but you also need people who are consolidators in the kinds of roles that allow them to achieve that consolidation. You'll often find this in the lawyers, in the communicators and in the auditors. Sometimes you'll even find it in the risk function, though I would say quite possibly not as often as you would like. You need to focus on building your organisation's collaboration muscles. The silo is the enemy of sustainability. In fact, I think it should be a flag in risk reviews or org effectiveness reviews if there is not some kind of cross-functional reporting line or forum in place for every role. You also need to make it clear to your people that they're expected to play nicely with others. That behaviour needs to be identified, rewarded and encouraged in meaningful ways. Conversely, siloed behaviour and processes have to be called out and addressed. We're all familiar with the mechanisms for this: KPIs, leadership messaging, performance reviews, promotions. The governance functions as a group, so that's risk, legal, communications, reporting, finance, can play an important part in catalysing collaboration. Risk, legal and reporting are often the places where these issues get caught before the risk is realised. Sustainability should be another, and sometimes it is, but too often it's kept outside the strategic functions. What that means is that management of sustainability risks becomes a tick box exercise, and the person who is responsible for managing it is the one that everybody tries not to invite to meetings. Where I've seen sustainability working well is where it's seen as a core part of doing business, where it's funded and prioritised in the same way you fund your finance function. People identify finance as a route to power. Most people in organisations have some understanding of the basics of finance. People who want to get ahead quite often make sure they have some financial credentials, whether it's an MBA or a grad cert in corporate finance. Nobody thinks it's peripheral to the business. Nobody thinks the business shouldn't be spending money on resourcing their finance function. So the profession of sustainability management also needs to take a hard look at itself. So we cannot afford to have sustainability people who don't understand the business that they're working in and the value that it provides outside of their area of specific expertise. You have to be able, as a sustainable, if you have a sustainability in your title, that doesn't absolve you from being deeply involved in what is happening within your business on the ground and understanding what the risks that you are the custodian of mean to the business as a whole. So there's a lot more I could say about enabling critical choices, and there are as many solutions to be crafted as there are structures to be transformed. I know this is likely to be listened to by people from many different backgrounds and roles. So if I was going to ask you to take away just two main ideas from this would be one is really question the allocation of power within the hierarchy that you're dealing with and see if it's fit for purpose. Secondly, look for those carbuncles in your organisation, places which are cut off from other parts of the organisation and either expertise or information are hoarded or they're ignored. You need to reconnect those. It might hurt, but you have to reconnect those into the organisation and make the organisation deal with them. And that's my 10 cents.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vanessa. As always, truly brilliant. Round of applause, everybody, please, for Vanessa Richards. Brilliant. Vanessa, I've had loads of comments and ideas and inspiration being fed through over the course of the last 10 minutes as you were speaking. And that allocation of power throughout the organization. There's of course different types of power, aren't there, within an organization? Do you want to just comment on that?
So I think this gets back to this sort of prioritizing the role of collaboration, because I think a lot of this comes from that command and control mindset where things like having very specific skill sets are valued. It's comfortable for the organization to say, we know what this person does. They've got this qualification, they've got this set of experience, and so we're going to point them at something and then they can just go and do that, and that will create value. The roles that act as bridges, they may have the power technically to have those bridges, but in reality they may well not. So legal, sustainability, risk, you have a say in things. You're often embedded into processes, but it doesn't mean that that say is effective, that your voice is really heard, or that anything is done other than a sort of tick box or lip service approach to it. So it gets back to the power needs to be reinforced by the culture of the organisation, and any and every role and responsibility can be undermined by a culture that doesn't support it, including the board and senior management. As the famous saying is that, you know, culture will eat strategy for breakfast every day. So this is top down.
So leaning into that, in terms of your typical company structure, so of a listed company at the moment, does that structure allow for this to happen?
There is always potential in every structure. There is no perfect structure. And I would not be arguing that mining companies in particular move away from what is essentially a hierarchical and command and control approach, because I think it's too deeply set in the nature of the business and the nature of the people who tend to work in the business as well. But as with life, really, companies have to understand that your strengths are also your shortcomings, and you have to look for ways to mitigate against those shortcomings. And that is why I think the collaboration piece is so important, and why it has to be hardwired into mining companies in order to be able to soften the edges of that command and control approach, so that you've got real mechanisms and a real sophisticated understanding in amongst the leadership that can be used to drive that kind of collaborative behaviours across the business.
So within this, Vanessa, in terms of the metrics, so and this is one of the questions that's been fed in, traditional metrics of success rewards leaders in a way that doesn't necessarily align with what we're speaking about here. And so how do we go through that transition, or how do we move towards more useful metrics?
Yeah, so you can't have a metric that says be sustainable, because what does that even mean? You can and do have metrics saying don't behave in an unsafe way. And so this is why I argue that the really the core of it is the collaboration piece. So what you can have as a metric and say, are you collaborative? And that can be broken down into things like 360 sort of spot reviews. So everybody that you've worked with across other functions, did they find it a rewarding experience? What forums are you involved in? What collaborative cross-functional types of activities are you involved in? Is your team involved in them? If and I'd argue you probably should have things like tiger teams and sort of project specific or initiative specific teams. Are you involved in them? Are you seen as a valuable contributor? Those kinds of hard metrics can feed in, and they can be game changers in the same way that you can be the greatest performer in all time in terms of production, but if you're killing people left, right and centre, then you won't get your bonus.
Well, that's a relief, isn't it? Now, Vanessa, last year you talked to us about crocodiles. This year you snuck it in at the end and you mentioned tigers. A big hello to your lovely cat who has been listening in intently throughout the course of the talk, which is glorious. No. It's been wonderful. So thank you very, very much, Vanessa. As always, truly brilliant. Round of applause for Vanessa Richards, please, everyone. Absolutely great.